My name is Adele Hargrove. I'm 73 years old, retired librarian, widow, and lately I've come to realize a mother outgrown by her own son. 3 hours. That's how long it took me to drive to the villa, through the winding hills and autumn-colored coast, past the lavender fields Walter and I once walked hand in hand. I knew every mile by memory, but this time, it didn't feel like coming home. I parked outside. The garden I'd spent 20 years tending had been reshaped into something sterile. All symmetry and soulless topiary. The brass plate by the mailbox used to read, "The Hargroves." Now it simply read, "The Monroes." My heart didn't break. Not anymore. I was far past that. I stepped through the gates, dragging my suitcase like a ghost returning to a place that had forgotten her. The doors were already open, as if they expected me. Inside, he was waiting. Brandon, my only son, sat in Walter's favorite leather chair. His wife, Clarissa, perched beside him in a silk dress far too expensive for a casual afternoon. On the other sofa sat Nancy and Hugh Monroe, her parents, their postures stiff and rehearsed, like they were on some social board passing judgment. I stood quietly. Then Brandon spoke. "This is their house now, Mom. You're not welcome here anymore." He didn't stutter. He didn't even look ashamed, just practical, cold, like he was stating a business fact, as if the villa, my villa, was an asset recently reassigned. No need for drama. I looked at the faces in the room, Nancy's smug little smirk, Clarissa's eyes avoiding mine, Hugh checking his watch, already bored. I could have yelled, demanded explanations, fought. But instead, I smiled, that quiet smile you give not when you're okay, but when you're done pretending. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the keys, the very same ones Walter had pressed into my palm the day we closed escrow 37 years ago. "All right," I said. "If it's not my place anymore, then here." I handed Brandon the keys. His fingers closed around them, clueless. "Thank you for driving down," he said, as if dismissing a housekeeper. I turned, wheeling my bag out of the doorway. They thought I was leaving quietly. They had no idea I'd already prepared a surprise, one they'd never forget. I smiled, handed the keys, and set up a surprise they'd never forget. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. But as I drove away from the villa, I passed by the old magnolia tree where Walter proposed, and for just a moment, I let my hand rest on the steering wheel a little tighter. That wasn't just a house. It was our legacy, our memories, my motherhood, all erased in one line. "You're not welcome here anymore." But they made one mistake. They assumed I was just an old woman with nowhere to go. They forgot what mothers like me are made of. They forgot what decades of silence can build inside someone. They forgot who built that villa in the first place. And most of all, they forgot that I never let go of the deed. If this story is already reaching into your chest, take a breath and stay with me. This isn't just about a house. It's about what happens when you're told your worth is over, but you choose, quietly, steadily, to begin again. Stick around, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder. You're never too old to reclaim your power. And sometimes, the quietest women hold the loudest truths. My name is Adele Hargrove, and I used to believe that kindness was enough to keep a family together. There were signs, subtle at first, like whispers in a noisy room. But now, looking back, they were thunderclaps I chose to ignore. Brandon started borrowing money in his early 30s. It was never much at first, a couple hundred for a shortfall in rent or to cover a temporary dip in cash flow. He'd call it a bridge loan, and I always gave it with a smile. Mothers do that. We assume it's love, not convenience, but over time, the amounts grew. $5,000 to cover an investment that never returned. $10,000 for Clarissa's boutique. A quiet 20 grand for something personal that I was too polite to question. I never saw a cent come back. And worse, I never asked for it. Not once. Because I thought, foolishly, that keeping the peace was more valuable than setting a boundary. I wanted Brandon to feel supported, not judged. I told myself he'd pay it back when he could. But the truth is, I didn't want to believe my own child could take advantage of me. Clarissa, on the other hand, was never unclear. She was calculated from the moment she stepped into our lives, all smiles and silk blouses, but her eyes were always measuring, scanning the room like a realtor, not a daughter-in-law. At dinners, she'd ask leading questions. "Do you ever feel lonely in such a big house, Adele?" Or, "Have you considered downsizing? All that space can feel so wasted I'd laugh, brush it off." I told her I liked the quiet, but it wasn't curiosity, it was inventory. She knew the value of every inch of that villa. She knew how much Walter and I had put into it, financially and emotionally, and I think deep down, she hated that our legacy stood between her and the life she wanted. I remember once, after Walter's funeral, she stayed late while Brandon helped clean up. She poured herself a glass of my wine, sat at the breakfast nook, and said, "You know, Adele, it's a shame to see this place gather dust. Maybe it's time to think about what's next." What's next? At the time, I thought it was concern. I thought she was offering comfort, but now I realize she was making a case, quietly, gently, manipulating. I can't say I was blind, but I was tired. Grief does that. It makes you cling to what's left, even when what's left is crumbling. And Brandon, he wasn't the boy I raised anymore. He used to write me notes when he was little, fold them into paper planes and throw them into the hallway. "I love you, Mommy," they'd say. "You're my hero." Somewhere along the line, that boy grew into a man who measured love in deeds, and mine apparently had expired. I thought I could hold on to him with grace, that my patience, my silence, my giving would prove my love, would bring him back. But grace without limits is just open season for takers. Clarissa didn't change Brandon. She revealed him, and I let it happen, because I was afraid to lose him, because I thought being good was enough. Now I know better. Now I know silence isn't always noble, and trust, once broken, becomes memory. They'd been planning this for years. I see that clearly now. Every accidental conversation about property, every passive comment about aging, every warm gesture that left me a little colder inside. It was choreography, and I danced along. But I'm not dancing anymore. They took what they thought was mine, but I still have something they never understood: resolve. There was also the time I found Clarissa wandering the back hallway where Walter's study used to be. She acted surprised, said she got lost looking for the bathroom. But there were papers in her hand, my old folder of maintenance records, and a yellow legal pad she must have found in my drawer. She brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, Adele, I thought this was mine." Sorry. It wasn't the apology that stayed with me. It was the glint in her eye. Like she knew she could get away with it. Like she already had. The problem with being a quiet woman is people forget you're watching. They mistake your gentleness for oblivion, your silence for surrender. But I wasn't oblivious. I saw more than I let on. I watched as Brandon grew more distant after every business dinner with the Monroes. I saw how he started dressing like Hugh, speaking like him, as if shedding the skin of the boy I raised and stepping into someone else's mold. And still, I waited. I gave them chances to stop, to come clean, to remember who I was to them, but they didn't. And now, I don't owe them kindness anymore. It was late afternoon when I returned to the villa to retrieve the last few boxes I had left behind. The hallway leading to my bedroom still smelled faintly of lavender, my scent, not Clarissa's. I paused at the door, fingers brushing the handle, when her voice cut through the silence behind me. You don't have to go in there, Adele. I turned slowly. Clarissa stood with her arms folded, wearing a soft pink blouse that clashed with the steel in her voice. She always dressed like an afterthought of a Hallmark movie. Polite pastels, gentle curls, but her words carried a sharpness that silk couldn't hide. I left some things in the dresser, I said, keeping my tone even. She stepped closer. No, I had someone box them up. They're in the garage. I nodded. Then I'll just take a quick look. Clarissa's smile froze, just for a second. Then she tilted her head like I was a child misunderstanding instructions. Adele, this isn't your space anymore. I blinked. She continued, smoothing her voice into something sweeter. You deserve somewhere more fitting, more comfortable. For your age, there it was. Not even veiled. My bedroom, the one Walter painted himself after our 5th anniversary, the one with the built-in cedar closet and the antique mirror I brought from my grandmother's house, was now apparently too much for me. Not because I couldn't handle stairs, not because I asked for help, but because I was inconvenient. I studied her carefully, the way her posture shifted when she spoke to me now, like a supervisor managing a fragile employee, like she owned the title daughter-in-law, and I was simply the inconvenience that came with the deed. You've made a lot of changes, I said quietly. She beamed. Yes, Hugh helped us repaint the guest rooms. Brandon's turning the office into a media room. Our office? I corrected, just to see if she'd catch herself. She didn't. I suppose you could call it that. But it's all being refreshed now. You know, new energy. How sanitized. She gestured vaguely toward the stairs. We've set up a beautiful room downstairs for you if you ever want to visit. No stairs. No fuss. If. Not when. I realized in that moment that Clarissa didn't just want space. She wanted erasure. She didn't want reminders of the woman who came before her. She wanted full ownership, emotional, architectural, generational. You know, she added, almost as an afterthought, I told Brandon we should get you one of those cozy senior condos near the lake. Lots of women your age love the peace and quiet. I felt my hand tighten around the box I was holding. Not from anger, from clarity. This was not kindness. This was conquest wrapped in hospitality. Clarissa was polite, but not generous. She was graceful, but not grateful. And more than anything, she was dangerous in the way only calculated women are. The ones who use mother like a dagger coated in syrup. She stepped aside finally, letting me pass, but I didn't walk into the room. I looked at it from the threshold. The light catching the edge of the bed frame, the empty wall where my painting used to hang. I didn't need to step inside to know I no longer belonged. You're right, I told her softly. Some places really do stop feeling like home. She smiled again, pleased, thinking she'd won. But I wasn't conceding. I was confirming what I already knew, that something sacred had been broken. And the woman standing before me in a pink blouse and a polished smile had driven the knife. Later that evening, I sat in the car with the engine off, hands still on the steering wheel, replaying her words like a sermon I never asked to hear. You should be somewhere that suits your age, Mom. I translated it in my mind over and over, twisting it into every possible shape to soften the blow. Maybe she meant well. Maybe she was just trying to help. But no. Clarissa said exactly what she meant. And what she meant was, I no longer fit in the life she was constructing. I was not elegant enough for her table settings, not modern enough for her lifestyle photos, not quiet enough to be tolerated, and too quiet to be feared. What's worse was realizing how carefully she'd waited. Not once had she said these things in front of Brandon. No, Clarissa knew how to maneuver. Sweet in public, condescending in privacy. Her war wasn't loud. It was made of polite refusals, withheld invitations, glances that didn't linger, hugs that never reached her chest. And just like that, I saw it. Not a daughter-in-law, but a strategist. Someone who played the long game. And she thought I didn't notice. I remember the last dinner we had in that house, the four of us seated at the old mahogany table that Walter refinished himself when Brandon was still in middle school. The evening had that stillness you only notice in hindsight, the kind that settles just before a chapter ends. Walter had made his famous pot roast, a little dry that night but still warm and fragrant with rosemary. Brandon brought a bottle of red wine Clarissa said was organic and ethical. I remember that because she said it twice, as if the label excused its bitterness. Clarissa sat across from me, back straight, barely touching her food. Brandon, cheerful but distant, kept the conversation safe. Traffic, a promotion, a client who bought 3 properties in 2 weeks. And Walter, dear Walter, watched them both with the eyes of a man who had lived long enough to read the silence between words. "I'm glad we could have this," he said, raising his glass gently. "Family dinners are harder to come by these days." Brandon smiled, nodding. "Yeah, we've all been so busy." Walter turned to him slowly. "You're building a good life. That's what I wanted for you. Just don't forget the one we already built." Brandon's smile twitched, as if he wasn't sure whether it was a compliment or a warning. I felt Clarissa's gaze shift toward Walter, measured and unmoved. Her fork hadn't lifted once. Then Walter added, "You know, son, people say thank you 100 ways. But real gratitude isn't words. It's how you care for what's been handed to you, how you protect it." I glanced at Brandon. A small tension pulled at the corner of his mouth. He sipped his wine instead of replying. Clarissa didn't even flinch. Her eyes flicked toward the far wall, where the oil painting of our wedding day still hung. Her glance lasted just a second, but it said enough. She already had plans for that wall. "I think," Clarissa finally spoke, "gratitude also means letting go of things when they've served their time, not clinging, but evolving." Her voice was calm, even soft, but each word landed like a cold breeze. Walter didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long, steady moment, then back at Brandon. The room felt smaller after that. The conversation drifted into neutral spaces again. Real estate markets, upcoming holidays, a neighbor's new fence. But something had shifted. Walter leaned closer to me that night as we cleared the dishes and said under his breath, "She sees the house as a prize." Not a promise I'd nodded, but I didn't want to believe him. Not then. After dessert, an apple tart I'd baked from Walter's mother's recipe, Brandon hugged us both a little tighter than usual. "I love you, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "I know." He meant it. I believe that even now. But love doesn't always mean loyalty, and affection is no match for ambition, not when someone's whispering in your ear about investment potential and modernizing assets. I stood at the window long after they'd left, watching their car pull down the gravel drive. The taillights disappeared, and for a moment, I told myself I was being dramatic, that Clarissa was just different, not dangerous, that Brandon would never. But Walter's words echoed again. "They'll show you who they are not with apologies, but with decisions." That night, as Walter and I loaded the dishwasher together, a quiet ritual after every meal, he placed a hand over mine, stilling it. "She'll change him, Adele," he said, "bit by bit until he forgets who he is. And one day he'll think it was his idea all along." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say he was being unfair, but the sadness in his eyes silenced me. We sat outside afterward on the veranda, just the two of us, wrapped in old quilts even though the air was still warm. Walter poured the last of the wine and passed me the glass. "She doesn't see this place as a home," he said. "She sees it as leverage. A platform, something to monetize or curate, not preserve." I asked him what we should do. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "We just keep loving them. But love doesn't mean surrender. One day, Adele, you'll have to protect what we built, even if it means protecting it from them." I didn't know it then, but that was the last real conversation we'd have before his heart failed. And now, every word he said feels like a prophecy. I drove home in silence, the road stretching long and lonely ahead of me, not just because of the distance, but because of the clarity that had started to take shape. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, as if holding onto it could keep me from unraveling. When I arrived back at the cottage, the one Walter and I had lived in before the EME villa, I didn't take off my coat. I didn't turn on the lights. I just walked straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on. 3 teaspoons of dark roast, boiling water, the slow pour, a ritual older than grief. The quiet of the room wrapped around me like a cocoon. I sat down at the table, the chipped oak one Walter once threatened to sand down but never did. In front of me, a stack of old files, ones I hadn't touched in years. The estate folder was thick with documents. Some of them dated back to the early 90s. I thumbed through pages of our trust, real estate transfers, titles, and the layered protections Walter had insisted on after his first health scare. My fingers paused on a set of documents stamped with our lawyer's seal. I read it once, then again. The villa, the very one Brandon now claimed as his, wasn't legally his to give. It belonged to a limited liability company, one Walter had quietly created and funded, with both of us as managing members. And according to the last amendment, I held full authority after his death. They didn't even know. I leaned back in the chair, letting the truth settle. It didn't come with fireworks, just a slow, steady heat in my chest, like coffee starting to work its way through tired veins. Clarissa's words echoed, "You don't belong here anymore." They thought they'd won, that I would retreat into the background like an old photo, faded, quiet, irrelevant. But Walter hadn't left me empty-handed. He had left me the tools. And more than that, he'd left me his trust. And a quiet challenge to protect what we built. I stood up, walked to the desk, pulled out the heavy metal file box with the hard lock, the original operating agreement, sealed and notarized, the deed transfer, tax forms, all of it. I took a yellow highlighter and marked the critical lines. Then I said it out loud, the thing I hadn't dared admit, even to myself. Enough. The word filled the room, not shouted, not whispered, just final. I wasn't going to argue with Brandon. I wasn't going to plead with Clarissa. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I was done pretending not to see it, the mother they thought they could manipulate. She was gone. They remembered the version of me who served, who forgave, who swallowed hurt like it was communion. But that woman didn't live here anymore. In her place stood someone who had buried a husband and raised a child alone. Someone who knew the cost of silence and the danger of delayed boundaries. I wasn't here to fight dirty, but I would fight smart, and that fight had already begun. Jenna Van Dorn had been with our family for over 20 years. She was the kind of woman who didn't waste words, sharp-eyed, steel-voiced, and always 3 steps ahead. Walter used to say, "If you ever feel like you're walking into a snake pit, bring Jenna. She knows how to skin them alive with paperwork," I called her the morning. After I found the LLC files, she picked up on the first ring. "Come in. I've got fresh coffee and a war room waiting," she said before I even said my name. When I arrived at her office, a restored brick building tucked between a florist and an old bank, she already had my folder opened and her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. "I read through the last 4 years of amendments," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "He thinks he's clever." A small smirk played on her lips. "But sweetheart, Brandon couldn't read a trust document even if it were printed on dollar bills." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Tell me what you see," I said quietly. Jenna tapped her pen against the highlighted sections. "The villa is under the LLC, and by the last active clause Walter signed before his passing, you, Adele Hargrove, retain full legal authority over the management and use of that property." She leaned forward. "Meaning your son has zero claim unless you grant him one, which I'm guessing you haven't." I shook my head slowly. "Good," she said. "Then we begin." She slid a second folder across the desk, this one labeled Conservation Easement Proposal. I took the liberty of drafting an agreement to designate the back 2 acres of the estate as a protected habitat zone. That land borders the old wetlands, doesn't it? "Yes," I said. "Walter used to watch herons nest back there in the spring." "Perfect. Once registered, that status will make any development, or resale, a bureaucratic nightmare. The city will tie them up in red tape for years." Jenna's fingers danced across the keyboard as she continued. "And while we're at it, I'd like you to sign a management reassignment clause. That way, should anything happen, full control doesn't fall to Brandon or his ambitious wife." Her disdain for Clarissa needed no further words. I looked over the papers. The language was precise, protective, powerful. "Do you want to add a clause about tenancy?" she asked, glancing at me. "In case you want to remove current occupants?" I thought of Clarissa's smirk, Brandon's silence, the way they took up space like they'd earned it. "Not yet," I said. "Let them settle in. Let them feel comfortable." A beat of silence passed between us. Jenna nodded. "You always were the quiet kind," she said. "But quiet doesn't mean passive." "No," I said. "Not anymore." I signed the conservation document first, then the management clause, then a third form, a notarized memo clarifying intent of ownership. Jenna sealed each document in a legal envelope and marked it with red ink. "He'll never see it coming," she murmured. I let my hand rest over the pile. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like justice. "We're not going to destroy him, Jenna," I said, looking her in the eye. "Of course not," she replied. "We're going to educate him." I stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Jenna?" "Yes?" "Thank you for remembering whose name is on the foundation." Her smile was small but proud. It was never theirs to erase, Adele. The next morning, I made a call I hadn't made in nearly 6 months. Finn picked up halfway through the second ring. "And Adele?" "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "Do you still know your way around a circuit board?" He laughed. "Are you kidding? I live in them." "Good. I need your help." "Tech help." There was a beat of silence. Then, "What are we building?" When Finn arrived later that afternoon, he brought more than just his laptop. He brought 3 duffel bags, 2 toolboxes, and the same quick-witted charm he'd had since he was a boy who once turned my microwave into a motion sensor candy dispenser. He stood in the middle of the empty villa, looking up at the ceiling, hands on his hips. "I haven't been here since Grandpa's memorial." "I know," I said. "It's different now." He glanced around the cold, modern furnishings Clarissa had picked, all glass and chrome, nothing of warmth, no picture frames, no soul. "So," he said, unzipping a bag, "you want to bug the place?" I smiled. Not quite. "I wanted to talk." Finn blinked. "Like surveillance? More like revelation." He raised an eyebrow. "I want you to install smart lights, motion sensors, voice-activated commands, anything that can respond or react when people are in the room." "Okay," he said slowly, clearly intrigued. "Do you want it subtle or theatrical?" "Somewhere in between. I don't want to scare them, just remind them. Remind them of what?" "That this house remembers." Finn gave me a look, half admiration, half concern. "Are we going full haunted mansion here?" "Nothing spooky," I said. "Just a house with a voice." He nodded, his mind already working. I can do multi-zone audio, set up personalized triggers, lights that dim or flash based on phrases, maybe even an AI assistant with preloaded responses in Grandpa's voice if you want. I hesitated. Walter's voice. No, I said. Use mine. Finn paused. You sure? Yes. I want them to hear me, loud and clear. Even when I'm not in the room, he gave a short nod. I like it. Poetic revenge, I gave him the spare key. They'll be back this weekend. He glanced at his watch. Then we have 5 days. We moved quickly. Finn mapped out the floor plan. I showed him where Walter kept the server box in the basement. The walls still carried the faint scent of cedar and old leather. Memories pressed against every step, but I didn't have time to grieve. Not now. Where do you want the triggers? He asked. In the dining room, where they eat off plates I bought. In the master bedroom, where they think they own dreams they didn't earn, and in the hallway. I want that hallway to remember my footsteps. Finn grinned, spoken like a woman with a mission. That night, I made sandwiches and coffee while he began wiring the first zone. You're doing this for justice, right? He asked between bites. Yes, I said, but not just that. I want them to know the difference between ownership and entitlement. He looked at me for a long time, then quietly said, I always wondered why you stayed so quiet, Annadelle. Because talking doesn't always change things. But silence, when used right, can shift the ground under people's feet. He smiled. You know, I think Grandpa would have loved this. I looked out the villa's bay window, watching the sky darken over the pines. No, I whispered. He would have built it faster. My phone rang at 8:47 a.m. sharp. I recognized the number instantly. Not Brandon's, but Clarissa's office line. She rarely used it, which meant this wasn't a casual check-in. This was business, or at least her version of it. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice sugared and unnaturally light. How are you feeling today? I sipped my coffee before answering. Well enough, Clarissa. And you? Oh, busy. We're trying to reorganize a few things in the house. Well, your house, of course. But since you've been so generous letting us stay, we figured we should handle some of the maintenance responsibilities. I didn't say anything. Let the silence fill. She cleared her throat. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about a quick document we need you to sign. Nothing serious, just a simple power of attorney form. Specific to property maintenance, it'll make everything smoother. For the landscapers, repairs, and so on, I let the request hang in the air. She continued, overly casual. Brandon thought it'd be more efficient, especially with all the vendor stuff. You know how those invoices pile up? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I'm sure they do. Right? So, if you don't mind, I'll have it sent over for signature today. Or better yet, I could swing by. Bring it myself. We could have coffee. Maybe even lunch? It was almost charming the way she layered manipulation beneath manners, like icing on a moldy cake. I kept my voice warm, maybe even a touch clueless. Oh, that sounds lovely. I'm not sure I'm free this afternoon, but how about later in the week? There was the briefest pause, a hitch in her breath. Sure, of course. It's not urgent or anything, which meant it absolutely was. Well, send it over whenever's convenient, I said. I'll take a look. You're the best, she chirped. Honestly, it's just a formality. Another pause. Then, with an extra dose of honey, we really want to make things easier on you. You've done so much already. Ah, there it was, the praise before the push. I leaned back in my chair. Clarissa, I appreciate the thought. But I'm quite all right managing things myself. I still know how to read a contract. Her tone didn't waver, but I heard the strain. Of course. No rush. We exchanged goodbyes. She hung up a little too quickly. I set the phone down and stared out the window. Finn was in the yard testing the motion triggers with a leaf blower, laughing at himself. Clarissa's voice echoed in my mind. Just a formality. I knew the game. You make the other party feel helpful, then rush them into paperwork while their guard is down. I'd seen Walter play the same moves in boardrooms. The only difference was he had built things. Clarissa merely inherited the hunger. That she thought I wouldn't read the fine print was almost insulting. I walked to the safe in the hallway, the one hidden behind a framed painting of the Appalachian Trail, Walter's favorite. Inside, next to a velvet pouch of old coins and his Navy insignia, was the original LLC charter. I skimmed it again. Clause 4C. No external authority shall be granted over the estate, its operations, or financial channels, unless unanimously signed by all managing members. There was only one managing member left. Me. Let them try. Later that evening, I received the document via email. It was a scanned PDF, poorly labeled HOA_permission_form. Sloppy. I almost laughed. Jenna would have a field day with this. I didn't open it right away. I wanted them to sweat. The morning sun filtered through the villa's tall windows as Finn wheeled in his equipment. His cart looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. All blinking LEDs, tangled cords, sleek devices labeled in handwriting only he could decipher. The quiet house, stripped of my presence for too long, suddenly pulsed with possibility. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. He crouched beneath the stairwell, pried open the hidden fuse box, and began threading cable through the old walls like veins, reconnecting to a dormant heart. The house, once mine, now woke again, not with warmth, but with warning. "This is the brain," he said, holding up a black module the size of a book. "Central processor, ties all the sensors together. It learns, adapts, even listens." He installed it behind a painting of Walter's, a stormy seascape with a single lighthouse. Appropriate, I thought. Every fortress needs a signal. Next came the door sensors, invisible to the eye but deadly precise. "Every entrance is covered," Finn said. "You'll know the second anyone steps in." He moved like a composer in his element, orchestrating light and air into something sharp, reactive, aware. Motion sensors lined the hallway. Pressure pads slid beneath the rugs in the foyer. In the guest rooms, cameras as small as pinheads were tucked into the sconces. "I don't want surveillance," I said. "I want presence." Finn smiled. "You'll get both." The living room was next. He installed ambient light strips beneath the crown molding, shifting tones from soft gold to icy blue depending on who entered. Coded by face recognition, tied to behavior. He clapped his hands once. The room dimmed. A soft sound followed. Not music, not words, just breath. "Was that?" "Simulated inhalation," he said, "like the house is watching." Waiting. A chill moved down my spine, and I wasn't afraid. It was the power of it, the precision, not vengeance but consequence, cold, calculated. We moved to the dining room where generations of Hargrove meals had been served. He embedded a voice module in the chandelier, linked to specific phrases. "When someone sits down and says, 'Cheers,'" he explained, "the lights will flash and your voice will say, 'Don't toast with stolen silver.'" I chuckled. "That one's for Clarissa." "In the bedroom," he continued, "you can trigger the window shades to slam shut and replay old voicemails from Walter." "No," I said quickly. "Not his voice." Finn hesitated, nodded. "Yours then?" "Yes, calm, but clear." In the master closet, I recorded lines into the interface. This closet remembers who it was built for. "Shoes don't walk loyalty into a room. You inherit bricks, not legacy." My voice, but colder. I barely recognized myself, and I liked it. By evening, the final test began. Finn dimmed the main lights. I sat quietly on the couch while he moved room to room, triggering the sequences. The hallway lights flickered as he walked, like eyes blinking in disapproval. The dining room echoed with my voice. The guest bedroom lights changed hue based on movement. Soft if I entered, harsh when he did. In the bathroom, the mirror fogged with steam, revealing etched words as it cleared. Truth shows in silence. How did you... Smart mirror, he shrugged. Laser-etched film and timed humidity. I stood silently. The villa pulsed with quiet intelligence. No fire, no violence, just a house with memory, a house with standards. As he shut down the demo, Finn turned to me and said, "You know, this place, it's not just secure. It's armed." With meaning, I nodded. "This house," I said softly, "will know who belongs and who doesn't." He smiled. "It has teeth now." The call came just as I was wiping down the kitchen counter, the smell of lemon oil still fresh on my hands. The screen lit up with Brandon's name, and for a moment I let it ring. By the fifth buzz, I answered. "Hi, sweetheart," I said calmly. There was a hesitation, as if he was surprised I didn't sound bitter or bruised. "Hey, Mom. I hope this isn't a bad time." "Is there a good time for what you're about to say?" I asked lightly. He exhaled through his nose. "I just wanted to talk logistics." About the villa, I leaned on the edge of the counter, already knowing where this was headed. Clarissa's parents. They're coming down next week. For good, actually. They're retiring early, and with the kids growing, we just figured it made sense. Sense, I repeated. "Yeah, I mean, you're not living there. It's too big for just one person, and we thought it'd be best to settle everyone under one roof." For stability, I didn't interrupt, letting him build his castle of logic, brick by brittle brick. You know how hard it's been managing the kids and keeping Clarissa's folks involved. Having them in the villa would just streamline everything. "And where does that put me?" I asked. A beat. "I'm not saying you can't visit," he replied, "but we need the space." It's not personal. I walked to the window. Outside, the leaves rustled in the wind. Even they seemed to recoil from his words. "Not personal," I said softly. "You're telling me I don't belong in the home your father and I built. That I should let the people who never laid a single brick in that place take over. But it's not personal?" Brandon sighed again, defensive now. "I'm not trying to fight. It's just a house, Mom, and right now, it's one we need." I paused, then asked, "Brandon, have you ever paid a property tax bill on that house?" "No, but did you help design it? Choose the tile that Clarissa complains is too vintage. Did you sit next to your father during his last weeks as he stared out that bedroom window every afternoon at the oak tree and whispered, 'We built this?'" Silence. He didn't have a response, only shifting guilt that came through in his long pause. "I'm just saying," he finally said, "Clarissa's family would treat it with respect." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not cruelly, just hollow. "Respect? Brandon, they're treating it like a free hotel with free staff. And you think you're being generous by evicting the woman who made your bedtime cocoa for 12 years. He bristled. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" "I'm trying to do what's best for my family." I let those words linger. My family, as though I was no longer included in the circle. "Brandon," I said finally, my voice even, "you can't offer someone something you never owned. That house is not yours to give, never was. You were born inside it, not born to claim it." "That's not what this is about." "It's exactly what this is about. You're making decisions like you inherited something you didn't earn, and you expect me to nod and disappear. I didn't mean to." "I know what you meant," I interrupted, still calm. "You meant to move me aside politely, to clear space for Clarissa's empire. But let me tell you something, darling. I may be out of that house, but I am not out of the picture." I heard a faint catch in his breath, a tightening of the throat. A son realizing, too late, that his mother was no longer a soft landing. "I have to go," I said gently. "There's lemon pie in the oven." He said nothing. I hung up. The phone slipped from my hand to the counter, and I stared at the sunlight streaming in across the linoleum. It used to feel like warmth. Now, it felt like spotlight. They thought I was retreating. That silence meant surrender. But what they didn't realize was I had just drawn the line, and I was ready to let the house speak for itself. It was the spring of 2002 when I rolled open the old garage door and stared at Walter's car, a '67 Mustang, cherry red, manual transmission. He had rebuilt it himself when we were first married. Every bolt, every hose, every patch of leather in the interior had passed through his hands. It wasn't just a car. It was a memory on 4 wheels. But Brandon had just gotten his acceptance letter. Full tuition was out of reach, and there wasn't time for pride. I remember running my fingers along the dusty hood. The paint had dulled, but the lines were still beautiful. Walter used to call it our Sunday ride, even when we barely had gas money. That morning I stood there alone, one hand gripping the letter from the university, the other resting on the car. Brandon was inside, still asleep. His world had just begun to open, while mine had started quietly folding in. I sold it to a collector who drove 4 hours to pick it up. He didn't haggle. Maybe he saw something in my eyes, or maybe he heard the catch in my voice when I said, "Take care of her." Brandon never knew what I gave up. Not fully. I didn't want him to carry that burden. When he came down to breakfast and saw the empty garage, he asked, "Where's Dad's car?" I smiled. "Gone to someone who'll drive her." He tilted his head, confused. "But you loved that car." "I love you more," I said, "and I just want you to have a future." That moment, his eyes lit up, hopeful and innocent. He hugged me so tight, I thought my ribs would crack. If someone had told me that little boy would grow into a man who'd throw me out of my own home, I wouldn't have believed it. But time has a cruel way of unveiling things slowly, like fog burning off in sunlight, until you see the whole wreckage beneath. I blink back into the present now, standing in the same kitchen where I once packed his school lunches. The sound of the refrigerator hums behind me like static. On the table lies a folder, deeds, contracts, signatures, cold legal truths, and next to it, an old photo of Brandon in his cap and gown. His eyes were the same then, but his smile wasn't. Back then, he used to say, "Mom, when I'm successful, I'll take care of you." I didn't need taking care of. I needed remembering. But somewhere along the line, I stopped being a person and became a placeholder, a name on a deed he assumed belonged to him. They say motherhood is a sacrifice, but they don't tell you it's often an invisible one. We do it quietly, selling cars, skipping new shoes, working 2 jobs, because we believe in the future we're building through them. But what happens when the future forgets? I pour myself a glass of water, hands steady. This isn't about revenge. It's about balance, about setting something right. Not just for me, but for the version of Brandon who once clung to my hand in parking lots, who cried when I left him at preschool. That child is gone. And the man who took his place thinks I'm weak because I was once gentle. He doesn't know that the same hands that sold Walter's car without blinking can also sign the papers that remove him from what he never truly owned. I sit down, pen in hand, and whisper, "It's time." Not just for me, for her too, the woman who gave up and gave in for far too long. The house was quiet, as if it too was holding its breath. Outside, the air was thick with the kind of stillness that only arrives before something breaks. I sat alone in the small study off the kitchen, where Walter once kept old records, where Brandon used to sneak in to steal toffee from the top drawer. Now, the drawers were filled with legal papers, evidence of how far I'd come. I picked up my phone. For a long while, I just stared at the screen. There was no trembling in my fingers, no hesitation in my chest, just A silence, the kind that comes when morning ends and clarity begins. I opened a new message. Thank you for helping me see things clearly. I paused, then typed the second sentence. The house will now decide who's welcome. No more, no less, no anger, just truth. I hit send. No reply. Of course not. I wasn't expecting one. Clarissa had always been a master at pretending she didn't hear what she didn't want to answer. And Brandon, well, he'd grown into someone who saw silence not as absence, but as power. As if ignoring me somehow made him untouchable. But tonight, silence belonged to me. I closed the phone, slid it into the drawer, and turned to face the wall of screens. Finn had mounted 6 compact monitors, neatly arranged like a control tower. Each showed a different view. Front gate, foyer, living room, stairwell, hallway, guest room. Motion sensors were active. Voice detection was calibrated. Light patterns were programmed to flicker unpredictably when triggered. I reached for the control panel, sleek, matte black. One touch, and the entire system synced into active watch mode. I sat back, sipped slowly from my mug of tea. No sugar, just warmth. They'd return tomorrow. They always came on Fridays. Clarissa's parents in their Sunday best, even on weekdays. Clarissa in her soft silk scarves, trying to look effortless. And Brandon trailing behind, acting like the benevolent heir of something he never earned. But this time, the house wouldn't open for them. It would watch. It would listen. And when they tried to step in with their air of ownership, it would remind them, with lights, with whispers, with slamming doors and spoken warnings, that this house remembered its true keeper. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had walked away from being the mother who kept giving until nothing was left. I had walked into this version of myself, quiet, steady, clear. And when morning came, I wouldn't lift a finger. Because the house would speak for me. Friday afternoon, right on time. From the monitor, I watched their car roll up the driveway like it belonged here. Brandon stepped out first, his blazer sharp, purposeful. Clarissa followed, adjusting her oversized sunglasses, though the sky was cloudy. Her parents lagged behind, carrying bags like they were checking into a hotel. No knock, no hesitation. The gate had opened because I left it open. Just once. The front door creaked, and with that, the house awakened. They entered, eyes scanning the space they believed was theirs. Clarissa's heels clicked against the marble as she whispered something to her mother, who only nodded with approval. Her father was already commenting on the renovations we'll need, like it was theirs to plan. Then the door shut behind them. It clicked, locked. Clarissa turned. Brandon, did you close the door? Brandon shook his head. The lights flickered. Once, twice, a third time. Then the voice came, soft, mechanical, feminine, but layered with something uncanny. You shouldn't be here. Clarissa froze. What was that? Her mother asked, eyes darting around. Brandon tried to brush it off. Probably the motion system. I told Mom she needs to update this junk, but as he stepped forward, every hallway light snapped off, one by one in rapid succession, until only a pale glow remained above the stairwell. This is not your home. The kitchen faucet turned on by itself. Water gushed like a warning. Nancy screamed. She turned to run, but the door didn't budge. She banged on it. Brandon, it's locked. Clarissa's father grabbed the handle, twisted, pulled. Nothing. A sound rose from the hallway upstairs. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Brandon looked up, trying to pinpoint the source, but saw nothing except a shadow darting across the wall. No body, just movement. Then the mirror near the staircase shattered with a shrill pop, sending shards across the floor. Clarissa shrieked, "What the hell is going on?" A cold gust swept through the foyer. No open window, no draft, just cold. And the voice again. "You've taken what is not yours." Clarissa spun. trying to yell something back at the system like she could reason with it. We have rights. Brandon is her son. This is his house. But the walls didn't care. The chandelier above them flickered in violent staccato, casting jagged shadows like claws across the walls. One shadow, taller than a man, grew, stretched, then vanished into the ceiling. Brandon tried his phone. No signal. I can't get out, he shouted. He ran to the side door by the laundry room, yanked it open, and a piercing alarm blared through the house. Not loud like a siren, low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Too human, too wrong. Nancy stumbled back in panic, slipped on the marble, and fell. The sound of her body hitting the floor echoed down the hall like a gunshot. Clarissa's father rushed to her side. Her leg, he said. It's her damn leg. She can't stand. Clarissa ran to Brandon. Do something? This is your mother's doing. Brandon's voice cracked. Mom wouldn't. She doesn't even know how. The lights all shut off at once, pitch black. And then, one by one, they flickered back on, faint blue now like hospital lighting. Above the staircase, a screen blinked awake. My face, pre-recorded, calm, straight-backed in my reading chair. If you're watching this, it means you've walked into a place that doesn't belong to you. Clarissa's hands flew to her mouth. Brandon turned pale. I gave you everything. I would have given more if you'd asked. But you took. You schemed. You lied. This house remembers. The screen cut to black. Then the final whisper, so soft I barely caught it through the monitor feed. You don't belong here. That was the breaking point. Brandon charged for the front door again. This time, it clicked open. I let it. They spilled out. Clarissa holding her mother, her father cursing under his breath, Brandon bringing up the rear, face ashen, confused, humiliated. They didn't say a word as they reached the car, didn't look back. The door clicked closed behind them again, this time on its own. I sat in my living room, alone, screen still glowing in the dark. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I simply whispered, to no one in particular, "Good girl." The house sighed, gentle, like a woman who'd finally been heard. I was pruning the camellias when their car screeched into the gravel. The slam of the doors echoed like gunshots across the quiet street. Clarissa led the charge, heels digging into the earth like she owned it. Brandon trailed behind, jaw tight, eyes everywhere but on me. They didn't bother knocking. "Mom," she barked before even stepping onto my porch. "We need to talk." I didn't flinch. I wiped my gloves against my apron, took my time, then looked up. "You need to leave," I said, voice flat. She laughed, sharp, performative. "You think this is over? You think you can use that haunted house trick to scare us away?" Brandon stepped forward, tried a gentler tone. "Mom, Clarissa's upset." And honestly, so am I. That was humiliating. I met his eyes. Was it humiliating to be told no? Or was it the first time someone didn't hand you what you expected? Clarissa cut in. "You don't own that house. Walter left it for Brandon. It's his inheritance. And you're sabotaging his future out of, what, spite?" I studied her pearls, her manicured hands, the way she spoke about my husband like he'd been her blood. "No, Clarissa," I said. "What I did was protect what Walter and I built. You mistook kindness for weakness." Again, she scoffed. "You can't do this to your own son." I turned fully to Brandon. "You stop being my son the moment you let someone else call my home hers." His face paled. Clarissa stepped forward again, brandishing a folder like it held the weight of the law. "I'll sue," she snapped. "You forged documents, clearly." "That house was supposed to be ours." "Check the deed," I said, cutting her off. Calm, cold. Clarissa blinked. "What?" I walked past them both, into the house, returning seconds later with a neatly printed copy of the ownership record. I handed it to Brandon. He read it in silence. I could see the lines of disbelief forming on his face, each word a blow. Clarissa snatched the paper from him, eyes scanning. Her voice trembled now. This says it's owned by a limited liability company. But Walter formed it 10 years ago, I said, to protect the property. I kept it quiet. Let you all think what you wanted to think. Until the day I had to remember who I was, Brandon finally met my gaze. You really don't trust me anymore? I trusted you so deeply I let you stay even after you disrespected my grief. I trusted you when you told me you needed money for a startup and never paid me back. I trusted you when you said Clarissa needed rest and asked if she could stay for a while. Clarissa's voice cracked. You're bitter. You're just a lonely old woman punishing us because you miss control. No, I said. I'm reclaiming peace. I stepped forward, close enough to smell her perfume. You will not get that house. You will not touch an inch of that land. And you, Clarissa, my voice sharpened. You are not my daughter. Stop calling me Mom like the word will bend me. Brandon was frozen. Clarissa's fists clenched. You'll die alone in that house. If that's the price of dignity, I'll pay it twice. She opened her mouth again, but I raised a hand. No more threats. No more performances. Take what you brought and leave. They didn't move. So I walked to the door, opened it wide, and waited. Brandon looked at me one last time, something flickering behind his eyes, regret maybe, or fear that the woman who'd always waited in silence wouldn't be waiting anymore. Then slowly they walked back to their car. They didn't slam the doors this time. As the engine faded down the street, I sat back on the porch. I picked up my gloves and returned to my camellias. Jenna placed the folder on the table with her usual quiet precision. The late afternoon light streamed in through her office window, bathing everything in amber. She didn't speak at first, just studied me the way a dear friend does when they're about to deliver. Something big. It's done, she said gently. I nodded. Then it belongs to them now? She pushed the document forward. The ink was still fresh, the name written across the top, Haven of Grace Women's Foundation. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The villa was no longer mine. I stared at the paper. It wasn't grief I felt, not anymore. It was something quieter, more whole. Relief, maybe, or freedom dressed in silence. I kept a copy for you, Jenna added. The transfer deed is ironclad, and as you requested, you retain full visitation rights. You can come and go. You just no longer own it. I traced my fingers along the edges of the page. I don't need to own it, I said. I just needed it to mean something again. Jenna smiled. You made sure it does. The Haven of Grace wasn't some grand charity or glossy nonprofit. It was a small, stubborn little organization run by women who had known loss intimately. Widows, abandoned mothers, women who'd had to rebuild from dust. They took in those who were invisible elsewhere, gave them keys to healing and sometimes, if the stars aligned, a second chance at life. That house had once been my prison of silence. Then it became my battlefield. Now, finally, it would be someone's sanctuary. Aren't you going to miss it? Jenna asked, leaning back. I looked out the window. The streets below were bustling, indifferent to the transformation that had just occurred one floor up. I'll miss what it was, I said, but not what it became. She closed the folder. Clarissa and Brandon won't be able to touch it. You've cut every legal thread. I gave a short laugh. That was never about property. It was about power, about them thinking they had it, and now? Now, I've given it to people who understand what it means to start over. That evening, I returned to the villa one last time, not as an owner, but as a visitor. The new director of Haven, a woman named Elise, met me at the gate. Mid-50s, silver streaks in her braid, eyes like someone who'd carried whole worlds on her back and still chose softness. We're still setting up, she said, unlocking the door, but I made sure the garden stayed the same. One of the new women likes to sit by the roses, says it's the only place she feels like she can breathe. I nodded, my throat tight. Inside, the air had changed, no longer sterile or guarded. The walls were the same, but something about them felt warmer now, as though the house had exhaled. The furniture was rearranged. There were new curtains. A corkboard by the kitchen held drawings from children I hadn't met, next to pinned notes that read things like, "Today I got out of bed." He doesn't own me anymore. I remembered how to laugh. I stood in the hallway where Clarissa had once cornered me and told me I didn't belong. The same hallway where I'd once dropped groceries on the floor and cried quietly so no one would hear. Now it echoed with quiet music and the shuffle of slippers from someone upstairs. Elise followed my gaze. It's strange, isn't it? How homes remember things. No, I said softly. It's exactly what I hoped for. We walked to the sunroom where an older woman sat reading, her legs tucked under her. She looked up, gave a soft nod, then returned to her book. A mug of tea steamed beside her. I whispered, "Does she like it here?" She said she finally sleeps through the night. I nodded again, blinked away the sting in my eyes. Before I left, Elise touched my hand. "You didn't just give us a house. You gave us dignity." "No," I replied. "You always had that. I just gave you the keys." It started with an article, just a modest column on a regional news site. Woman attempted to deceive mother-in-law for property, denied residency by local women's foundation. The headline was blunt, the content sharper. The journalist had done their homework, pulled property records, interviewed someone at the Haven. They didn't use Clarissa's full name, but the dots weren't hard to connect. They painted the picture truthfully, how a grieving widow nearly lost the only home she had left to her son and his wife, and how the home, in a poetic twist, now served women who'd known abandonment all too well. Within hours it spread. Local Facebook groups, then Reddit, then a TikTok creator with 500,000 followers narrated the story in a 90-second clip with dramatic piano music. She gave away a $9 million home not out of spite, but as a message, the voiceover said, to those who forget what legacy truly means. The comments came in waves. "This woman is my hero. We need more stories like this. That DIL really thought she could steal and get away with it. Silent revenge is the best kind." They didn't know my name, not all of them, but they knew the story, and they were paying attention. Then came the think pieces, the ethics of inheritance, the silent exploitation of aging parents, the unspoken grief of being discarded. Clarissa didn't respond publicly. No statement, no video defending herself, not even a vague quote about misunderstandings. But I heard from a friend that she'd deleted her social media, pulled back, went quiet. It was the loudest silence I'd ever heard from her. And Brandon, he didn't call, not a text, not a knock on the door, not a single word of apology or fury. And that was its own answer. The breeze that morning carried salt and lavender, drifting across the wide wraparound porch of what used to be my home. I still visit, once a month maybe, not out of nostalgia, but to bear witness, to honor what was, and more importantly, what it became. Today the porch wasn't empty. She was already sitting there when I arrived, her shoulders straight, her silver hair tucked into a soft bun, a knitted shawl draped over her arms like armor that had seen both war and peace. "Good morning," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. She turned, eyes curious but warm. "You must be Adele." "And you must be Margaret," I smiled. "I heard you moved in last week." She nodded, her fingers wrapped around a mug that was still steaming. "This place, it's something." I took the seat beside her, the same wicker chair Walter had built, still sturdy after all these years. We sat in silence for a beat, letting the air settle between us. "I brought chamomile," I offered, lifting the small tin from my bag. She held her mug out like a quiet truce. I poured. "You remind me of someone," she said after a moment. "Someone I once used to be." How so? Margaret looked at the horizon as if reading something I couldn't see. I buried a husband. Buried a lot of dreams with him too. Then I buried the version of myself that didn't know how to be alone. I nodded, feeling the resonance in my ribs. That's a lot of burials. She chuckled. That's life, isn't it? A series of funerals and rebirths. We sipped. A seagull landed on the railing, observing us like we were the story. Did you ever lose everything? She asked softly. The question wasn't prying. It was an invitation. I looked down at my hands, hands that had once changed diapers, held a dying man's cheek, signed a deed that reclaimed a life. I thought I did, I admitted. When I was pushed out of this house, it felt like a death, like I'd lost the last part of myself that mattered. She waited. But then I remembered. I'm not the walls. I'm not the title. I'm not even someone's mother, not anymore. I'm just me. And that's something Margaret gave a slow, knowing smile. The day I realized I didn't need to be needed was the day I became free. We clinked mugs like it was a toast. The waves below crashed in rhythm, not loud or angry, just persistent, like women who'd learned to endure, then outlast. You know, I said, my voice quieter now, this porch has seen a lot of sorrow. I can tell, she replied, but also peace. As if the house exhaled. We didn't need to say more. There was healing in the hush. We sat there, two women who had worn widowhood like a shadow, but now carried it like a scarf. Visible, but no longer suffocating. I thought of Clarissa, of Brandon, of the silence that followed their exit. Then I thought of Finn and the sound of his laugh while setting up the lights. Of Jenna, sliding a folder across the table with eyes that said, I'm proud of you. Of Margaret, a stranger only hours ago, yet familiar like a chapter from the same book. I thought of Walter, too. Did you love him? Margaret asked, as if reading the thought. With everything I had, I answered. She nodded. So did I. We didn't cry. We didn't need to. Healing doesn't always come in sobs. Sometimes it's just sitting beside someone who understands without explanation. When the tea was gone and the sun had climbed just enough to warm our knees, Margaret turned to me. Come again soon? I smiled. You won't even notice I've been gone. The knock came just after 3 p.m. I knew it was him before I even opened the door. There's a silence that belongs only to your child when they return, not out of entitlement, but out of surrender. I opened the screen door. Brandon stood there. No Clarissa, no dramatic entry, no smugness. Just him, wearing the same gray sweater he used to wear when he stayed home sick from school. It didn't fit the same anymore. He looked older, tired in the eyes. Hi, Mom. I nodded. Didn't step aside. Didn't close the door either. He looked down, then up. I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to explain. Even I said nothing. He let out a slow breath, and I watched the weight on his chest shift. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I want to start over. As your son, not your heir, not your judge, just your son. The wind stirred behind him, tugging gently at the hem of his sweater. The same porch where he once played with toy trucks now creaked beneath a man who had lost his footing in the world. I didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, I turned and walked into the kitchen, boiled the kettle. He followed, but didn't sit until I motioned to the chair. 2 mugs, the same ones from years ago. I poured the tea slowly. Chamomile. No sugar, no honey. He cradled the cup with both hands, steam rising between us like a soft veil. We sat there, mother and son, with decades between us, and also none at all. He looked out toward the sea. I did too. I hurt you, he said finally. I let things happen. I let her speak for me. I let silence become my language. Still, I didn't reply. Not because I couldn't, but because I knew he didn't need a verdict. He needed space. And space was the one thing I'd always given him. So instead, I reached forward and nudged the sugar bowl toward him, even though he hadn't asked for it. A small act. But sometimes, forgiveness doesn't announce itself. It just happens. He looked down at it, swallowed. His eyes misted, but he blinked quickly, like he didn't want to make this into something more dramatic than it needed to be. We sipped. The porch creaked again. A bird landed on the rail, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my son sat beside me, not as a guest, not as an adversary, but simply as the boy I once knew. And I let the silence do what only silence can. It held us both. I sat by the sea this morning just after sunrise, the soft hush of the waves brushing against the rocks like breath against skin. The bench beneath me was cold at first, then familiar, like a friend who doesn't ask questions, only listens. In my lap was the same leather-bound notebook I used to write grocery lists, recipes, even little notes for Walter when he still left early for meetings. Today it held different words. I used to think I was the one left behind, I wrote slowly, but now I see I was the one who walked away. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come with answers, only with the right questions. What do we hold on to? What do we give away? And what do we carry long after it's gone? The villa behind me stood still, not empty, just fulfilled. I'd locked the door earlier that morning, not with sadness, but with a strange sort of reverence. For years, I was its keeper. Now it belonged to something greater. To healing, to purpose. Some places you keep, some places you give away, and some places, if you're lucky, you learn the difference. Walter used to say homes aren't just made of walls, they're made of echoes too, and this one held so many. The laughter of Brandon as a boy, the quiet tears I shed at midnight, the conversations we never finished, the forgiveness we didn't know how to ask for. I let the breeze take a few pages from my journal, blank ones. I smiled. They weren't lost, just on their way to a story I wouldn't write. Before I close this chapter, I want to say something to whoever might still be listening, wherever you are. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for carrying pieces of it in your heart. And if you've ever felt cast aside, forgotten, uninvited, know this: you are not broken. You are being remade. The sea changed colors as the sun rose higher. Blue, then gold, then a soft silver I hadn't seen since the morning Walter proposed. I thought about the way he held my hands, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of loving deeply. That same weight still lived in me, not heavy now, but grounding. As I sat there, Margaret waved from the porch, holding 2 cups of tea. I raised my hand in return, my palm catching the light. This was no longer a place of endings. It was a threshold. There's no ceremony for the quiet victories, no headlines for the moments when you choose not to harden. But those are the moments that shape us the most, when you decide, with your whole being, that the past can inform you, but will not define you. Brandon's visit still echoed in my mind. The silence between us had spoken volumes, and yet the tea I poured him felt like a beginning, not a forgiveness, not yet, but an invitation, a soft place to land for both of us. Somewhere, in another time, I might have begged for love, for validation. Now I understood that love freely given and withheld with reason was the greatest boundary and the greatest gift. I closed the notebook and stood, brushing off crumbs of sand. My feet found the path without thinking, back to the villa, back to the road, back to the life I had chosen, not one left behind, but one I walked into. So, dear listener, as we bring this story to a close, I ask you again, what will you walk toward? What home will you create? Not with wood and nails, but with grace and presence. Thank you for sitting with me, for sharing this bench by the sea, for believing in healing that doesn't shout but whispers. You still matter. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.